morning.
Good morning, Don.
How are you?
All right.
Morning to all of you, too. We wanted to talk a little bit today about DevOps and what it actually means, because we both kind of work in the space, obviously, like you do. And we see the word used. Remember when cloud was kind of just the marketing word of the day? We see DevOps used a lot that way. You know, we have DevOps tools, or we do this. And we wanted to just kind of share what we actually see the real world doing with this, where this actually hits the road and where it actually becomes a real thing. Brian obviously has a really strong perspective from the developer side. I'm a lot more the operations side, so we thought it'd be fun just to kind of do that together. Before we do that, though, a real quick note. As you came in, you should have found or perhaps sat on a flyer that looks a little bit like this one. So check under your butt. That is a activation code for a 90-day trial of Pluralsight. Pluralsight sponsoring the keynote today, so that's there. That is the longest trial that the company has ever handed out, as far as I know. So, and here's the deal, too. You need to use that before the end of the month. You got to use it by December 1st, or it'll stop working. But if you use that by December 1st, or if you have signed up at the Pluralsight booth already for a trial, one of you will magically be converted to a full annual subscription.
If you register today or you went by the booth.
Yeah, you got to do it today or if you've already gone by the booth. So do that, because a free year of that is pretty awesome. I'm a curriculum director for ops content at Pluralsight. So if that's your field and you want to kind of get with me and talk about what's coming in the library, what you'd like to see in the library, please grab me and definitely do that. So you don't need introductions. You have a little bit about yourself, or?
Yeah, if you don't know me, then I'm not doing my job.
Yeah, perfect.
So there you go.
So let's get started then. DevOps is not a tool. It's not something you can buy. It's not something you can rent. It's not even something you can make on your own. DevOps is an approach to managing IT, specifically application and service delivery. So I don't want to point out, this is not just about making applications in shop. DevOps is also about delivering all the services that you deliver to your users, including basic things like DNS, all the way up to all the application services that we offer. So it's really a philosophy. It's a management approach more than anything else. How many of you are doing a little bit of DevOps already? How many of you feel it's going well? How many of you think it's difficult? It is. There's definitely a lot of mental changes.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing. We want to get that right up at the front, particularly when this is somewhat of, I would say, a tools-focused show, right? Microsoft is a big sponsor.
Yeah.
We have a lot of Microsoft-focused technologies. Microsoft is the business of selling software and tools, and that's great. They make some great products. But it's a people, process, and then tools thing of embracing DevOps. You don't buy it, okay? You have to implement it. It's all about you and that culture shift. And I think that's the fundamental issue that people are having as DevOps is becoming popular, right? The cloud, yes, you can go buy the cloud, but you can't really do platform as a service just by buying the cloud. So
yeah, and I think that's really what you're going to see here. So we're going to talk specifically about what this means. DevOps is, again, a management approach, and there are some really core things that it stresses, that it believes are important. First off, I don't know if, are you going to click?
I was trying to, and it doesn't want to. This is a typical thing.
I'll tap.
Yep, looks like you're tapping.
Communication is a big part of this. How many of you work in an organization that you would say is fairly siloed when it comes to IT? Yeah, that's not going to work real well. I mean, you can still have divided up responsibilities, but I don't know, from the ops side, I'm so used to going into big customers, banks especially, saying, yeah, we're going to spin up a new server and we'll put it up and we'll do some tests. Oh, we have to go request an IP address from the lords of IP first.
Yep.
Because you all run into that, right? That doesn't work too well. DevOps doesn't really work with that. Collaboration, everybody working together, understanding that the goal is to deliver something to your customers, whether that's internal users or actual customers, and everybody getting behind that instead of just acting like it's their fiefdom. Integration is huge.
Well, and that's a fundamental issue, right? We start thinking about this first talking, right? It's a crazy thing, I know, talking to the operations guy, because they're evil, they're overlords, right? They don't let me, touch production. They don't let me, work with the servers. But when we think about integration, it's breaking down that traditional wall, which is I throw stuff over the wall to Don, and you're going to make it happen in production. And what we want to do is make it fluid, so it's a seamless exchange of not only technology, but of ideas and how you can basically continue to deliver that value.
Automation is a huge part of it. Here's where the whole concept of DevOps really came from. A little bit of an oversimplification, but it's a good story. Agile, right? You guys are familiar with Agile software development? It's all about iterating quickly, move fast, break things. We're gonna ship code, ship code, ship code, ship code. That's great, except in a traditional IT environment, you ship the code to operations who says, we have a maintenance window, and deliveries only happen between these hours on alternate Tuesdays when the moon is in the right phase. And you can iterate all you want to, but we're not actually going to deploy any of it. We're not set up for that. So it's really about smoothing the path and eliminating bottlenecks between the service creation, so the application or whatever it is, and the end user. It's getting as many barriers out of the way as possible. This is a huge, scary thing. It is extremely scary. We'll talk a little bit about why. A measurement of cooperation, I don't know. Probably a huge measure.
Well, I mean, obviously, yeah, there's two levels to it. There's actually the mechanics of getting along, right? Once again, it's that creating a brethren approach as opposed to an adversarial approach, right? Yep. And also, there's actually the word measurement. We think about having the metrics to understand what's working, what's not, so we can fail fast and succeed. Because fundamentally, we have changed the culture of what users expect. If you look at any of your smartphones, right, I'm sure a lot of you have numbers on your app store telling you you have updates. And a lot of you probably have control over when you take that because you're IT pros and developers, you're geeks. My wife, on the other hand, has it set to auto-update. She doesn't care. And she knows if it goes wrong, she's going to come to me and yell at me.
Sure.
But fundamentally, it's this, what's working, what's not.
You'll see a lot of organizations that are starting to practice DevOps do it by starting with one project. Okay, this application we're going to start treating in a DevOps style fashion as a way of becoming comfortable with the approach. And what that means is that team includes everybody needed to get that to the user. So instead of drawing a line between developers and network operations and identity operations and all this other stuff, everybody is on one team who's responsible for delivering that to the customer. And some of those ops people might be on other teams that also deliver things, and some of those developers might work on other teams that also. But your boundaries become focused on what you deliver. It kind of goes back to, you guys remember when VDI was a big kind of marketing word that was being thrown around a lot, virtual desktop? And I said, it's kind of silly because nobody's wandering around the office asking for a desktop. Nobody says, where's my desktop? What do they ask for? It's their apps. That's what they care about. And so organizing IT around apps and around services as opposed to specializations is how a lot of folks are kind of getting into this. It does start with more agile software development. That's like magic to me, so you can talk about that.
Well, I mean, first of all, agile is working. I mean, that is one of the fundamental shifts. In fact, when you talk to the deep thinkers, we really look at this next decade as about DevOps. And so what does that mean? Well, first of all, this whole issue of agile, right? We have big agile, robe and sandals, the preachers, thou shalt follow this methodology. If you don't, Don, you're evil and bad. All right?
I get that all the time.
Evil and bad, but that's sometimes good. But in all honesty, right, what happens is we've shown success, right? The statistics say about 3/4 of teams are doing some kind of agile, right? You guys are doing some type of agile practices. You might not be doing it well, you might be trying, but that's okay. It's that journey, not a destination. But what it comes down to is a focus, a laser focus on delivering what the user needs as fast as possible for your environment. And that's a key thing, right? Sometimes people feel bad, like I'm not doing agile right because our sprints are a month, right? We're not doing it fast enough. And then once again, we have this friction when we hand off to IT and we can't get out to the users. It's not that there's a one size fits all, it's that you're making this approach of changing what the goal is. Too often the goal is about controlling my environment, controlling my power structure, right? That's the hard part about from management buying is that if they have to give up control of the people and where they fit. And so we think about software development, what we're finding is that, look, focusing on the goal changes the way we build software. That's why in Scrum, everybody's a developer. We're just focused on the same goal. Yeah, you might focus on tests, you might focus on architecture, et cetera. You might have specialties. But you're all a developer for that same goal, which is delivering a unit of value at the end of the sprint. And now this is where we're having a little friction on why DevOps is becoming so popular. Because Scrum, as good as it is, as popular it is, Forrester and Gartner will tell you about 80% of organizations that are doing Scrum, okay, is that it stops there. I say, here you go, Don. Scrum does not have a thing that says the user gets the software within a period of time. Part of that's up to the user to say when they want it, but it's also up to how do we get it to them. And so what we really need to do is change this culture of going beyond that dev focus and thinking about that end-to-end experience. We can't pretend that the user doesn't exist. In fact, I don't like the term user. Customer is a much better thing, right? In fact, the more you personify the people you're delivering to, the more empathy you'll have for them. And then you'll think about, boy, would I like to get a crappy piece of software? Right? Is that what I want?
So what are DevOps opinions on software testing? Because here's the thing. Every single time I've gone into any business whatsoever and said, look, here's what DevOps means, and it means starting with Agile, which means you're shipping code more frequently. They say, well, wait a minute. You know, anytime we try to do something quick, we wind up shipping bugs. Well, sure. And so there is a role of testing. We don't want our users to have bugs, although can we be honest, how many of you have shipped software that was completely bug-free? Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay, no liars this morning, wow.
So it's gonna happen anyway. But what are the opinions on software testing, right? Because testing is where I fix it. You can code really quick, but then I can take a long time to test, right?
Right. And this is, once again, a fundamental shift in what you're doing. First of all, we're not saying testing goes away. In fact, that's probably the big misconception about Agile. It means, you know, no specifications, no rules. We're just writing code and throwing it over the wall.
Awesome.
Yeah, exactly. What it does mean, though, is a change in the metaphor. First of all, it changes the audience. Now, it's 2015, Don, and it's sad when I go into organizations and they're still not doing unit testing. In fact, back in 2006, I was at TechEd, had a great room just like this, had 1,000 people in the audience, and I lost about a third of them within 2 slides. And you know why? It's because I started talking about test. Test was a 4-letter word that developers did not want to hear. That's not my problem. We have QA departments for that. I am not a tester. I got that on my emails. It was horrible, right? It was actually depressing. That was the state of the industry in 2006. Today, successful teams that are embracing DevOps are starting as, to quote Ford, quality is job one at the developer. You are the first line of defense, my brethren, in that you need to take a high responsibility for the quality of the code you deliver. And there's a number of ways we do this, but it starts with the fact that you cannot manually check all the code you mess with. And that's where you get back to that A word, automation. Unit testing is your first line of defense to make sure you're delivering quality. But Brian, my software's old and crappy. I can't add unit tests. It's too hard. Oh, shut up. Okay? Right?
How many of you are devs who do your own unit testing today? Yes, it's catching on.
Fantastic. I want to see more hands up, though. And what I ultimately want to see is a unit tested day out of all of you. At a minimum, your new code should do it. You can't convince management, right? They won't let you just stop and write tests for a month or longer for some organizations. But what we do need to do is understand it's a continuous process that starts with you as the developers. And then the last thing I'll say about it right now is that one of the things we've learned from Scrum that works really well is, in general, reducing our QA departments. Now, when people hear that, they kind of go, what? Quit having a QA department and move the testers, the people that are focused on tests, embedded into the teams. And you hear me say that again later, especially when we talk about bringing the ops guys into the team and devs together, is that testers need to live with the developers, with the application that they're building.
Do you want to get like a real world example, a real company? I'll name names. A real large professional software company that is in the process of eliminating QA as a separate thing, and all the former test engineers are now just developers. So they've got twice as many developers pumping out code twice as fast, but there's no separate QA. You want to know who? Microsoft. The Windows Management Framework team, which I deal with a lot since that's who produces PowerShell, they don't do QA anymore. And it used to be the traditional, we're going to code for all day, and then we're going to build overnight, and the testers are going to come, and they're going to test, and we're going to ship bugs back, and the devs are going to fix that, and there's this big, ugly, iterative loop. They don't do it anymore. They're shipping more code, shipping it faster, knowing that although they will ship bugs, they have always shipped bugs, and now they have the ability to ship new code that fixes the bug a lot faster. So we don't have to sit on the bugs for a year while we wait for that cycle to loop through. But, and again, this is where DevOps came from, all the code in the universe doesn't get it out to the users. And so there really has to be a smoother flight path between the developer of whatever the code is. It doesn't have to be in-house code. Again, this could be you pushing out a new DNS build or a new Active Directory version or whatever else. But a shorter path between that code being compiled and it winding up on the user's desks. And this really does turn ops into a machine. That's what we have to become, a machine with a lot less manual effort. How many of you use Amazon's Elastic Beanstalk service? Nobody, really? Really? Wow. It's kind of cool. I'll tell you a little bit, just very high level, about how it works, because it's almost the perfect real world, already out there in production DevOps picture you can look at. EBS really only works for certain Linux-based virtual machine offerings that Amazon offers. So it's Linux VMs, that's its strong suit. And what essentially happens is a developer sits in their IDE, whether it's Eclipse or whatever they're coding in, and they pump out their code and they put a special folder, and that folder has some special files, text files, they're not complicated, and they simply describe the environment that the dev expects their app to run on. Yeah, my app, I tested against this version of Linux, and I've got these 10 packages are installed, and it's got to have these 4 different environment variables that's set to whatever, and they push that into Git. So they just push this into the GitHub repo. They walk over to their little Amazon console, and they say, I just checked in a new build. Amazon goes and pulls that out of Git, starts spinning up virtual machines, configures those virtual machines based on what that configuration file said, and presents it, and now it's running. And then it turns off the old version of those instances. So now it's the new version that's running. And as workload builds up, it just spins up more virtual machines and configures them the same way. And the dev can do some testing and say, oh, yeah, you know what, I found a problem, I'll fix it, and I'll push it. And that environment gets built the same way every time. So Amazon, in their role as the operations department piece of this, has automated all of the building of the VM and the configuring of the VM and the maintaining of the VM to the point where human beings don't need to be involved anymore. That was their role in ops, is to smooth the path between the code and the customer. The developer simply says, this is what the environment is expected to be. You ops people make a miracle occur. And that miracle is the automation. And so that is a really, really, really DevOps path. It's a great example of how it should work and could work. Obviously, that's a very small example. You start looking at your entire IT estate, that's a lot of work to make that level of automation for all those things. But that's the business we have to be in now. There are specific capabilities. So if you want a shopping list of training you need to be taking, tools you need to be either buying or building, these are the capabilities that have to come into your environment. And the first one really is to help the devs.
Yeah, there's a serious friction point in a lot of organizations with getting developers what they need to do their job, right? Virtualization was a huge win in the last decade, particularly with the democratization of it, where it's just free. If you run Windows, you have it built in and available through things like Hyper-V. Oracle made VirtualBox available free, and even VMware makes their client stack available for free. And so you can give them money to get your richer feature sets. But ultimately what we learned is that, look, a dev's got an environment where they code, and it's great when they get that F5 experience, right, in Visual Studio as an example, and the heavens open up and glory, my app is wonderful. Ship it, right, because it works on my machine. And so one of the things we learned if we wanted to make this better was we had to give developers a playground, a place where they could test, I know it's that bad word, but try it out in an isolated environment where maybe it doesn't have the latest thing that you'd randomly download from the internet. In the 90s when we were doing COM, it was a notorious problem, right? Because the way COM did registration, it was somewhat of a nightmare for some people in that, yeah, it worked there, it didn't work there. And so by having virtualization, a way to go to a playground, you can eliminate some of those friction points before you tried to actually get into production. The problem we have is that virtualization is a complex resource that must be managed, and we must have a virtualization policy. And therefore, if I want to virtualize something, I must go to my IT lords and ask and pray, please, sir, may I have another?
Correct. That's exactly how it should be. So look, at the end of the day, what we really want is an ability for a developer to say, okay, look, I've just realized that the reason this hasn't been working is because this component is missing. So they need to be able to go to ops and say, from now on, the environment needs to also have this. And we need to have a way to put that into something so that the developer can then just push a button and say, spin up the test environment, I'm ready. because that's also how we're going to spin up the production environment, and that way we know the two match. Now, in the Windows world, since most of you are this is a Microsoft conference, most of you are probably Microsofty, Microsoft's approach to that is largely now built around desired state configuration. So you have a text file that describes how you want the server to be configured, and you in ops are going to maintain that so that they, the developers, can push a button, maybe on a little web portal you built or somewhere else, a VM will be born and it will configure itself the way that text file says, which sounds exactly like what Elastic Beanstalk is doing, only for Windows. And then when it's time to move that into production, we eliminate the whole, well, it worked on my machine, because we're going to use that same text file to configure the production environment or the validation environment or whatever else. This is the configuration. Now, you know this smoothing of the path. How many of you work in a shop that uses ITIL or some other change management framework? You know who originally invented ITIL? It was the UK government. It kind of came out of a function of government. So basically, you're following the DMV's best practices for managing IT.
Oh, shit.
It is largely about managing change by putting so many hurdles in the way that no one will ever ask for change. And a lot of people will look at this approach and say it's completely incompatible with that, but that's not true. This is actually a change management person's dream come true, because every single change is pre-documented, because that document is how we make the environment happen. And so changes are as easy as turning on track revisions in Word. You'll see every single change when a change gets made. So this really, really can come across as very incompatible with the way a lot of us run IT, but it isn't. This is one of the best ways we can possibly do it, because it actually meets all the goals things like ITIL say they want, even though they really don't want any of those things. So that's one set of capabilities. And the next set is to really think about everything being continuous. How can I do continuous integration, continuous testing? This is a constant loop of things that are happening all the time. Anybody use a build server type arrangement? A few folks? Here's kind of my world is PowerShell, so I'll kind of describe in some specifics how this would work with some of your PowerShell stuff. Because you're going to be using your PowerShell stuff to keep your servers provisioned and configured and maintained and all that. And it goes something like this. You write your PowerShell scripts, tools, what have you. You check them into your GitHub or your TFS or whatever you kids use these days. And then you've got a build server out there, maybe running something like TeamCity. And it sucks the code over to itself, spins up some virtual machines, and runs automated tests against it. In the PowerShell world, those tests are written in a framework called Pester. And if the tests all pass, then that code gets put into the production repository, and it's now in production. So we've smoothed the path between the code, which in this case might be operational code, and where it's actually getting used. And there's two things that can go wrong. One, you could have coded bugs. I know you've probably never done that.
No, perfect.
No. You could have coded bugs, but your tests will catch those. And the other thing that could go wrong is your tests were crap, right? Well, but that's where you learn. If you shipped bad code, you go fix your tests so that you catch that the next time. And it's a continuous cycle. And that works for all your code that way.
Yeah, when we look at this, right, it's going back to that, it's a journey, not a destination. And one of the things I encourage developers, particularly in the Windows shops, is start thinking in the terms of PowerShell, right? You're going to be unemployed if your job is to log into servers and configure them manually. And if you're a dev that is constantly giving your ops person documents in the form of like Word, like this is how you deploy our thing, it's going to be a fail, right? And so I tell people, like Don in describing DSC, is that start thinking in what would it look like if it was configuration as code, right? Instead of a manual process, how would you automate that? So I tell developers, hey, yeah, you're figuring out a new feature. You're learning the new version of IS. And you realize that you need to make sure that you support certificate-based authentication. Great. Well, most of us, what we do is we go to our favorite browser, right, start searching. We figure out how to do it. Then we go to the GUI tool, and we try and do that. Right? But there's a friction point there, because you're going to do that, then maybe you sit down and take screenshots. In fact, there's tools out there that will make it easier to make those screenshots and documents better. We don't want that. Figure it out, and then go to the next level, look for the books, look for the documentation. PowerShell.org is a great place to start. And what you'll find is, how would you do this with scripts? And then share that with your brethren. And what we're looking at is everything to do to stop the friction of the monkey work, things that people can just do behind keyboards and mouse clicks, and deliver value with your brain. But it's accepting the fact that it's a constant process, right? You don't just suddenly, we're doing it perfect, right? It's a learning experience.
How many of you are developers who are accustomed to delivering a Word doc with some screenshots to your ops folks so that they know how to deploy your app? And ops folks, how many of you hate that? Yeah, we suck at it. We suck at following instructions. It's just not our core competency. So it's just true. And that's where all the instability in the environment comes from, because you've got this analog method of conveying important information, and you left out a period there, and I didn't type a period, and now the world exploded and gravity stopped. So the more we can reduce this friction and keep things code-based or declaratively, things that a computer can read, the more we know that the dev environment and the test environment and the production environment will all be the same, and the less we have to be involved. The idea of reducing the manual effort is not so much to improve efficiency, right? Getting rid of manual effort and getting efficiency out of that, the efficiency is almost a side effect. The real purpose of the automation is for consistency and stability. That's really why we want it. Because every time I have to go type something on a server, I run the risk of screwing it up. A very high risk in my case, because I don't follow instructions well. So the more we can get this automation going to get everything through test and production via code or automation tools or whatever, the safer it winds up being. And that makes the change control people happy. And that's how you start to get that executive buy-in. So there's a lot here where that's kind of the overall philosophy, right? But there's other benefits. There's things that the developers have to contribute to the operations side of the house.
Yeah, one of the fundamental things you run into with a lot of developers is our job is hard, right?
Really?
Think about an industry, I'm sorry?
It's not that hard.
Stop it.
It's just code.
Be nice. Right, how many industries go through a process where their tools change sometimes monthly, right? Where you're having to learn a new way of doing the same thing, but you have to learn it in this new syntax, this new format. So it is hard. So there is sometimes this willingness on developers to be somewhat introverted and focus solely on the code and not think about the execution environment, where it goes. And so it starts with the fact that a dev in a DevOps environment is going to at least understand the environment. I'm not saying you have to be an expert. I'm not saying you have to understand how to go in and set up routing tables on the network. And let's be honest, you don't want me generally doing that, okay? But you do have to understand that there might be complexities to make something work. The fact that, yes, I need certain ports open. This is going to be a callback situation. This is where I'm going to need certificate-based authentication. All those things require that you do that, build. And so, first of all, right, the dev has to learn this notion of automation artifacts over the documents, right? Start thinking of ways you can do it. The Linux world really bought into this, and that's why we see a lot of use cases where we see success, is that they got the religion that I don't want to be at the command line, I don't want to be doing things manually through a term session, right? I want to do it once, figure it out, and then click a button over and over again.
And the Linux guys, for better or for worse, almost got a free ride on this, because Linux is a text-based operating system. Everything in Linux comes down to basically being a text file or a folder. And so it's real easy when all your configuration is in text files to automate that configuration. You can easily change text files. Windows is an API-based operating system, which as a developer, you're well aware of. The operations guys hate that because like everything we need to do involves some different GUI or whatever else. So it's harder to get Windows to the point where an automation artifact can be used to provision the environment. But that's what desired state configuration is. And if you're in operations and you're not paying attention to DSC, do want to talk tomorrow, by the way, you need to. And if you're a developer in a Microsoft world and you don't at least know what DSC does and how it's put together, you need to find out, because that's how your code is going to get into production in an automated way. It's the only way it's going to happen. So it's a real key thing that Microsoft maybe hasn't been talking up enough.
And, you know, another thing that we run into is this need that how do you know when things are going wrong? Right, sure, it's one thing when Don gets a call and gets yelled at by someone in management because something's not working. And then what does Don do? Don comes over and he walks up and smacks you aside the head and says, damn it, this is why I don't let you put stuff into production without me looking at it, right? Because it sucks. And you're like, well, I didn't even know. And he goes, well, look at my logs. It's been going on for 2 weeks. Oh, well, God, it'd been great if I'd have known that. And so what we have to start thinking about is how do we get feedback? Right, asking your users what they like is one thing, but Steve Jobs has a great quote, people don't know what they want. And so we also have to ask the system, how are you doing? So you have to start thinking about instrumentation. Adding mechanisms in your code where it can provide the host environments, right, whether you're a component in a larger service environment or whether you have a custom app that is running everything, so that there's data being provided to operations to make sure it's running smoothly, and then when something goes wrong, it's made available to both sides, right? The guys from Flickr, Hammond and Alsop, did a great talk about that. And one of the key things that are successful with DevOps, this is back in 2009, folks, is that they had a shared view of what was going on. Now look, I don't really care a lot about the intricacies of some of the network stuff that Don has to manage and RAM availability and the way files are moving around and all this stuff. What I do care is that he keeps it running, but then when my system's not working, that I get that data. So having dashboards, having metrics that we can share about how the app is doing in advance before someone gets on the phone is a key principle. And this keeps going to this feedback loop, right? We want to have the metrics. The next level is this analytics. So first level is operations, right? Diagnosing failures caused by the code and the environment. The next step is making sure the application delivers on what the user wants. One of the frustrating points when you're doing development as a developer and you're working with your product owner to figure out what's our next set of features to do, besides fixing bugs, is that knowing what the users want and need. And sometimes it comes down to who shouts loudest, right? You ever been in the meeting where the nastiest manager gets their features? Yep.
Yeah.
So what we really want to do is answer what's next with data, empirical evidence. Analytics has a bad name because the internet is full of these slime balls that use nasty advertising, okay? The sad part is I understand where it's coming from because I like getting a paycheck. I've said this a lot. It's weird. My mortgage, unfortunately, I don't have my house paid off, so I have to give them money to stay there. And so we want to make sure that analytics are used appropriately, but what you want to do is find out what parts of the system the users are using, what features they use, what they don't, and what kind of input is being put into the system, and that's critical.
Yeah, and the end user experience is actually a really crucial thing. Essentially, and here's a simple way to think about it, every time your app is going to make a user wait for something, whether it's data coming back from a database or whatever else, you should be measuring that time and logging it somewhere. Decide where operationally that's going to go. Maybe it goes into a local cache, and then every time you open the application, it tries to grab that and send it up to a server for consolidation. But you need to be able to measure that, because in ops, the only way we know to measure an application is on stupid stuff like how's the server CPU doing and how's memory doing. The users don't care about that. They just care about my app is slow or my Outlook won't open. Right? That's the only two complaints in all of IT. My app is slow and my Outlook won't open, right? I used to go to these keynotes I swear, fun story. MVP Summit several years ago, Bill Gates came and did a talk. And it was just as he was leaving the company. It was really, really wonderful. Some guys had gotten on eBay and bought a copy of the Altair Basic User Manual and asked him to autograph it. It was just very cool. And then some MVP, hand to God this happened, stand up at the microphone and asked if Bill knew why his Outlook wouldn't open, and was serious. So those are the only two problems, but we operationally, we need the app to tell us what the user is experiencing, because we can't measure that directly. We can't reach out and see how their network card is looking very easily. So really contributing some instrumentation to us in ops will help us manage the health of the application. Once we've baselined this end user, okay, we know that this query usually takes about 10 seconds to return. That's the baseline. Everybody seems happy with that. When the users start calling up and saying, hey, my app is slow, we've got something we can look at. No, it's now taking 11 seconds. Calm the hell down. It's not slow. You need less coffee. Or, oh, yeah, you know what? The users haven't called yet, but we've noticed that this number has crept up to about 30 seconds. I bet they're going to start calling soon. Everybody get out of the help desk room. Right? And this is important because this is a huge myth. DevOps does not mean no ops. You still have operations. Just because the operations are perhaps automated does not mean ops isn't there, herding over them, keeping an eye on them, improving them over time. This is not developers writing routing tables for the routers. Ops is still very much there. We've just automated a lot of the manual effort.
Real quick, and that's a key point, right? We see this a lot because unfortunately some of our best use cases come out of the startup world, which means they're doing it on a shoestring budget with 2 or 3 people, okay? And that's okay. But if you look at some of the unicorns, the big successes like Facebook and Twitter, right? They have very dedicated operations staffs, right? And they have dedicated dev teams, but they know how to work together because they started with that culture, right? So it's a key tenet that we have to get away. Just like Agile doesn't mean no specifications, right? There are still people doing their job, but we have more empathy and understanding what each other does is a key thing here. Because there are people that will never touch a rack, a routing table, etc. Those are going to be hardcore IT people that may never have to talk to me. That's okay. And I might have some guys that write some crazy algorithms that do assembly, hardcore C++, that never care about the server because they write this little microcosm. But the rest of us have to at least have empathy for what each other's doing.
And that means that ops has got to contribute a little bit to the dev world as well. It means ops has to be comfortable coding. System programming, PowerShell for the Microsoft world. Look, there's a large web-based CRM company that you may be familiar with. They run around 11,000 servers. And you know how many people they have in the ops team? About 7. Because they know how to do systems programming. And that's where the Microsoft world is starting to point now. Companies are starting to figure out that this can now be done. And so you need to be the one doing it because otherwise you're the one serving up fries the next day. So ops is going to have to get a little comfortable programming. Almost everything we do that involves service or application delivery is going to have to be automated. And because all of us have slightly different business needs, we're probably not going to be able to find off-the-shelf tools that do exactly what we need. So you either have to be comfortable changing what it is you need and want, or you're going to have to be comfortable in the DIY environment and code some of this yourself. If you're in ops and you're not using source control, you're not using repos like NuGet or Chocolatey, which is built on top of that, you need to start. We and our dev friends need to be using some of the same tools to share these automation artifacts between each other. But it does not mean that ops needs to go get a copy of Visual Studio and learn C#. That's not necessarily where we're at. The ops world has its own higher level programming language, PowerShell, that's designed for what it is we do. And we're going to have to know that, but it doesn't mean you're going to have to go back and take C++ classes. Right? There's still different roles, but they're converging a little bit. There are areas of overlap now.
Yeah, and this is once again where you have a chance for communication. Once again, Don's not going to go in and start messing with web configs and start looking at your controllers and your MVC framework in your web application.
You sure? I'd like to.
He might. But in fact, once again, understanding what's going on is important. But having shared repositories where we, by the way, don't check in things like passwords and domain credentials, right? Is going to be useful for us to exchange information. And once again, developers I know sometimes have a friction point like, God, I have to keep up with JavaScript and C#. I don't need to learn PowerShell. You do. And the way we help each other is by having that centralized repository to share how we do things. And that means a common language.
Yeah, and devs, here's a real important bit of knowledge that you have gained over your career that you can share with us. Things like coding standards. Help us understand modularization, look at our code and offer some feedback and help us improve it because it's not been a professional thing for us. We didn't go to school for it. It's not often why we even got into the operations side of the industry. And so that type of helpful, constructive, friendly, professional, polite feedback is really, really useful. And I hate variable naming. It'll help us create code that we can share together. And so that's really important too. This is the big one.
This is hard.
You are going to ship bugs. You are going to crash the app. And you are going to fail the server. Learn to fail with style. knowing that you have never been perfect, and that with this you can at least iterate quickly enough so that the failure doesn't last forever. There's a side note here, and this is where it really has to start at the top of your organization and become a cultural thing. The words mission critical mean that if this doesn't work, someone's going to lose their life. Like hospitals have a lot of mission critical stuff. Your email, Mr. CEO, is not actually mission critical. It may be really damn inconvenient to not have email, but you'll live. I'll have it up in an hour, settle down, go have a muffin, okay? This has got to come from the top, because the top is where mission critical usually gets misdefined. If it isn't absolutely core to who you are and how you make money, then it isn't mission critical. So there are things that are going to fail, and it's okay. The company has to be okay with things not always working perfectly. They can't be running around threatening to fire people. You can't feel like you're about to be fired just because you put a period in the wrong place and an IP address. It can be fixed. We will all continue existing on the earth together. It will be fine. If nobody died, then it's fine. Now, if somebody died, you're probably going to get fired. I can't fix that. But this is really about accepting what has always been the truth, but we've got to stop putting time. So many companies put more time into preventing failure, which they never actually prevent, than they do actually creating stuff. And that's completely wasteful. So we're just going to create stuff a lot faster, knowing that some of it will fail, but we'll just keep creating it faster, so we'll get past the failure. This is really tough for management, especially has a lot of trouble with this.
And one of the key success points with DevOps is stop assigning blame, right? Stop going out of your way to point the finger and say, it's his fault. He let the server run out of disk space. It's his fault. His stupid logging algorithm had a bug and he looped and chewed up all my disk space.
Filled up my disk space.
Yeah, right? Stop. Create a culture of love and empathy for each other so that you're on the same team with the same goal. Because once again, it's about continuous value delivery to your customer. The things that makes your company successful.
Remember I said at the beginning that a lot of folks who are tackling this are starting with a project, and instead of having dev and test and ops and networking, everybody needed to get that to the customers on one team. When there's no wall to throw things over or to point across, it's a lot easier to say, we collectively screwed that up. We collectively now fix it. So you really have to move away from those silos and move over to what is the goal here? It's kind of odd that we wound up in these silos to begin with, because absolutely no company ever woke up one morning and said, you know what? We need some server admins. That sounds good.
Yeah. No, we need complete separate
server
rooms.
administration is not value. What companies want is to deliver services and applications to whoever is going to use those things. And so organizing our IT teams around that goal makes it a lot easier to focus on the goal. We do this, and that is a thing of value. It's not, I'm the lord of IP addresses, and I hand them out. Nobody cares. That's not actually a thing of value. It's a means to an end. We need to organize around the end, and that will make accepting failure a lot easier, trust me. And then you can point and blame the other product team that when they fail, because you still need someone to make a scapegoat, obviously. That goes without saying.
And when you're looking for the success stories, right, we've got others for you, but Microsoft is another key example. With Visual Studio Online, the online version of Team Foundation Server in the cloud in Azure, where Microsoft had success was one, that's getting rid of QA teams, testers are embedded, more engineers building things. Number two, entire teams own a feature end to end. So we'll pick one, version control, right? With Visual Studio Online, I can use Git-based repos or centralized TFVC, fantastic. And there's a team that owns it from design. Matt Mitrick, for example, is one of the PMs. He tends to be the guy we talk about features with. And he's got an entire dev team, and they got these testers, and they got these ops folks. And when something goes wrong, and we have interactions, I'm getting the person who has the ability to make change. Now, what that does mean, there are separation of concerns because you can't always have for certain organizations, Don might have to be the keeper of certain things in production. And I might actually be the one who has to commit the change to the source code for that separation of concerns. But we're on the same team, and what I do is I don't call Don up. I go, hey, Don, how are we doing on getting that thing fixed? He's going, wait, well, you got the code ready? Great, it's in the build server? Good, we're good to go. We work together on the same goal, and we own the feature end to end from idea, wish, what the user needs, to the actual delivery and the closed feedback loop. That's where Microsoft is seeing success, and it's where you'll see success too, by not being separated but together.
And we mentioned this already, but really, if you want to take away from this, like something really actionable, go home and get the C-suite together. Say, we're not going to obviously shift over to DevOps IT-wide overnight, but let's pick a project. Let's pick an application, a deliverable, a service. Let's pick something. And they've got to buy in, and they make them write it down and sign it and like record it and everything, because you're going to want that proof later. As this culture starts to, the ramifications start to happen and they start to question themselves, you got to be able to point back, no, you agreed that we were going to do this and stick with it. So it does require that top level buy-in. Some good references, just some shortened URLs here and stuff like that. There's a great book on the Ops perspective ebook that I put together that really kind of looks at just the operational impact of DevOps. And then there's also a dev perspective version of that. So both audiences kind of have something. And then a really good bit about Microsoft's journey on this path, because this is still a journey and they're still very much on it. They have not figured it out completely. They're fighting 20 years of a culture that has done things in a certain way. And it's tough. It takes a long time to start to break that out. But they're doing it. They had a top-level decision to do it and to go down this path. And they're doing a really good job of kind of sharing what they've run across. It's very enlightening. It's very, very real world. There's not a lot of marketing speak.
Yeah, and with the dev perspective, I put a dev perspective, because there's a lot out there. You will have to adapt, and key point Don made earlier, right, is everybody's problems tend to have some uniqueness. That's why, as an ops person, for example, you want to learn PowerShell, you want to be able to automate and customize for your environment. And as a dev, you have to appreciate what you're building, how you're doing, and where the changes are. It's a journey, and you have to get the management to commit to time. Like when people go to do Scrum, right, they do their first sprint, oh, we didn't do good, let's change, it's not working. No, right? When we taught people COM in the 90s, we said a good COM developer takes 6 months to get proficient, right? That means that first 6 months is kind of rough. For your Scrum teams, and then once again, your DevOps teams, it's gonna be the same thing. Understand that journey versus destination. I know I'm harping on this, it's like my theme today, but it really is. And Microsoft is on a journey, and they're sharing with the world, they're saying, here's the things we've gone through, here's what's worked, here's what hasn't. But just because it didn't work for us doesn't mean you don't try. You give it a chance and you adapt.
And so we'll leave you with one thing, which is hopefully the first thing your management will ask when you pitch this, which is why? What's the upside to the business? And it's a very legitimate. Now, if they don't ask that, you might work for someone else because they're not smart. But if they do ask, here's the answer. A, you're going to get the things you want faster. We're going to be able to deliver applications and services more quickly as we start to progress down this path. And you're going to get the features you want as opposed to the ones we think you want. And you're going to get constant improvement. You guys, you know how demoralizing it is to be an end user in a typical IT environment, right? A, we hate them because they're dumb. But it's just because it's like they can't get anything from us because we're locked into these patterns. So a huge upside of going down this path is users will be happier about their jobs to the degree that we can impact their happiness, because we're going to be able to continually give them a steady, small stream of improvements. That's one upside. The second upside is competition. It is a dog-eat-dog world, and it's real simple. Even if your company does not provide any IT whatsoever to anyone else, if your competition starts doing this, and they can improve their internal productivity, and they can deliver their products a little bit faster, or even just a little bit cheaper because you've reduced your overhead, then they're going to have a better chance of winning and putting you out of business. And this is real. You guys know where profit margins are these days, right? They're super, super thin. It does not take a big move of the needle on things like efficiency and operational overhead to make an enormous, enormous difference. If your competition is able to get a little bit more efficiency with this and they can save some money on overhead and they can pour that money back into, say, marketing, they might be able to really cut into your market share. So this is a real competitive thing. IT is one of the biggest competitive advantages you can possibly have, and DevOps is a way to maximize that investment. So hopefully that gives you something to take home. Please enjoy the rest of the time here. As Brent pointed out, please do fill out those session evaluations. They're tremendously important to us as conference chairs and speakers. Thank you for being here, and have a great rest of the show, and we'll see you at the luau tonight.
Thanks.
Thanks, sir.